3 Scary True Beach Horror Stories. Story 1, The Drowned Ones. Allison had been looking forward to this beach getaway for months. She and her friends, Tyler, Emma, and Luke, had planned a much-needed weekend retreat away from the city. Work had been overwhelming for all of them, and the idea of lounging on a remote beach sounded like the perfect escape. They booked a small cabin that was tucked away in a secluded cove along the coast. The rental description had promised serene waters, pristine sands, and absolute peace, far from the crowded tourist beaches. They arrived late in the afternoon on a Friday. The drive to rough the dense forests leading to the beach was peaceful, though the thick canopy of trees and winding roads gave Allison an uneasy feeling, as though the forest was watching them. The beach itself was isolated, framed by jagged cliffs on either side, and the cabin sat just a few hundred feet from the shoreline. The sea stretched out before them, calm and glassy, reflecting the last hues of the setting sun. It was breathtaking, but there was something about the silence that felt unnatural. There were no other people in sight, no boats, no distant voices. Just the whisper of the breeze through the trees, and the gentle lapping of the waves. Perfect, isn't it? Emma said, her arms stretched out as if to embrace the entire view. Yeah. Allison agreed, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the kind of peace that put her at ease. It was the kind of quiet that made her skin crawl, like the calm before a storm. They spent the first evening unpacking, exploring the cabin, and enjoying the bonfire they built on the beach. The sky was clear, the stars twinkling brightly above them, and for a while, Allison was able to push her unease aside. They laughed, told stories, and roasted marshmallows over the crackling flames. It felt like they had the entire world to themselves. But as the night wore on and the fire dwindled, Allison found herself staring out at the ocean. Something was moving out there. She squinted, trying to make out the shapes, but the darkness made it difficult. She nudged Tyler, who was sitting next to her, engrossed in a conversation with Luke. "Do you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" he asked, turning to follow her gaze. "Out there, in the water. It looks like people." Tyler furrowed his brow. "Probably just the waves or some driftwood," he said dismissively, patting her on the shoulder. "You've been staring at the fire too long." But Allison wasn't convinced. She kept her eyes on the sea, and the more she looked, the more certain she became that those shapes were in driftwood. They were people, figures standing waist deep in the water, motionless, staring back at her. The firelight cast a faint glow across the beach, but it didn't reach far enough to illuminate the figures. Still, their presence was unmistakable. "Guys," she said, her voice a little louder now, catching the attention of Emma and Luke as well. "Seriously, look at the water." Emma and Luke turned their heads, squinting at the horizon. For a moment, there was silence. Then Emma laughed, breaking the tension. "You just seeing things, Allie," she said. "It's probably just rocks, or some seaweed." But Allison couldn't shake the feeling of dread growing in the pit of her stomach. She wasn't seeing things. There were people in the water, too many to be just random swimmers, and certainly too still to be anything natural. And the longer she stared, the closer they seemed to be getting. Slowly, imperceptibly, they were moving toward the shore. "Let's just head back inside," Allison suggested, her voice tight with anxiety. "It's getting late." Tyler shrugged, but he could see that Allison was genuinely spooked. "All right, let's call it a night," he said, standing up and stretching. The others followed his lead, and they doused the fire before making their way back to the cabin. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy, the warmth of the wooden walls, and the soft glow of the lamps helping to ease the tension. But Allison couldn't relax. She stood by the window, peeking out at the beach. The moonlight bathed the sand in an ethereal glow, and the figures, whoever or whatever they were now much closer, their silhouettes clear against the backdrop of the ocean. They stood at the edge of the surf, oving, their faces hidden in shadow. "Allie, what are you doing?" Emma asked from the couch, noticing her staring. "Those people, they closer," Allison whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma frowned and joined her at the window, but when she looked, there was nothing there. "Allison, I think you need to get some sleep," she said gently. "You probably just tired." But Allison wasn't tired. She was wide awake, and the dread that had been gnawing at her all evening was now a full-blown panic. She stepped away from the window and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was just her imagination. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin, but even with her eyes closed, she couldn't stop thinking about the figures on the beach. Sometime in the middle of the night, she woke up to the sound of something tapping against the window. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the tapping was too rhythmic, too deliberate. She lay there, heart pounding, listening to the sound. Tap, tap, tap. Allison slowly turned her head toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but she could see the faint outline of a figure standing just outside, its shadow cast against the thin fabric. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she froze, too terrified to move. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the handle of the door creaked as if someone, or something, was trying to open it. Allison bolted upright in bed, her pulse racing. She glanced over at Emma, who was still fast asleep in the bed next to hers, oblivious to the sound. The door didn't open, but the presence outside remained. She could feel it, lurking just beyond the thin walls of the cabin. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a low, guttural moan, the sound reverberating through the walls like the groan of a dying animal. Allison's blood raw and cold. It wasn't human. Whatever was outside, it wasn't human. Without thinking, she jumped out of bed and ran to the door, bolting it shut just as the handle twisted again. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening to the soft, wet footsteps retreating back toward the beach. For the rest of the night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring out at the beach, where the figures had once again gathered by the shore, watching the cabin. The next morning, she told the others what had happened. Tyler and Luke exchanged uneasy glances, but neither of them had heard anything during the night. Emma, still skeptical, suggested it had all been a bad dream. But when they went outside, Allison's worst fears were confirmed. There, in the sand, were dozens of footprints leading from the water to the cabin. Wet, decayed boot prints that stopped just short of the front door. The group packed up and left that afternoon, cutting their trip short. As they drove away from the cabin, Allison couldn't help but glance back at the beach. The figures were still there, standing at the water's edge, watching them leave. Weeks later, Allison did some research on the area, and discovered that the beach had a dark history. Decades ago, a ship had wrecked off the coast, and many of the passengers had drowned. Their bodies were never recovered, lost to the sea. According to local legend, the spirits of the drowned still haunted the shores, waiting for the living to join them in their watery grave. Allison never went back to that beach. But sometimes, late at night, she could still hear the sound of wet footsteps in her dreams, growing louder, as if they were coming for her. Story 2, The Sea's Curse. Srahan her fiance, Mark, we're looking for a Tuthire engagement vacation, romantic expenditure coastal village at Boasted and spoiled beaches on panoramic South Sea. They had booked a charming beachfront cottage, miles away from the nearest town, hoping to enjoy some McNee dead to meal and aftermonths awful. Adding planning stress. The village was known for its fishing culture and quiet body, with the ocean stretching endlessly toward horizon, its deep blue waters reflecting clear skies. They arrived into early afternoon. The sun hanging la zillion theski. That cottage was everything had a pedfer, quaint, rustic, and dry taunt beach. From their pork, they could see through waves gently rolling onto shore. This place felt like heaven. Can you believe it, this view? Mark said, wrapping his arms around Shrahast stood on perk. It's perfect. Cher replied, leaning in time. As the sun began to set, casting a golden law across the sand, they decided to take Yoko along shore. The beach was deserted, no to insight. Anthony and Listensworth call softest and Segas in the rhythmic crash off waves. Hand in hand, they walked, leaving deep footprints in soft sandbar. Inthim. Butast wandered further down beach. Sir noticed something strange. The ocean seemed darker here, thwatter taking in a natural, in kai black u. And on horizon, shetoch sofen toutlin o faship, a large, looming silhouette that seemed out place sign susha small, sleepy village. She squinted, tr. Yingtig to better look, butaskically ash heads in it, theship bonished. Did yao see that? Srahist, tugging him marchand. See wat, he replied, looking around. Aship out there. Shepon ted towards horizon. Buttetheretendwordhorizon. Maybite was a fishing boat. Saradin triply. But something of that shifted settleder. Thereful colder here. This a breeze carrying an almost menacing chill. She shivered, but Mark pulled her closer, and continued her walk. Esmith their way back to cottage. The sun had nearly disappeared, leaving beach beneath in soft. Twilight. Thou and the sawit. Half bare-eyed inthescend, just a head off them, was something large and metallic. It was an old ship's anchor, encrusted with rust and barnacles, but it looked ancient. I saw it had been there for centuries. Next to it, there remained saphathic, rotten grope snaked out off ground, tangled in seaweed debris. That's strange, Mark muttered, crouching down to examine it. Sarah felt a wave of nausea as she stared at the anchor. Something about it felt wrong, like it didn't belong here. The sight of it filled her with a sense of dread she couldn't explain. Maybe it washed up from some wreck, Mark said, standing back up and brushing the sand from his hands. Come on, it's getting late. They hurried back to the cottage, the fading light casting long shadows on the beach behind them. Sarah kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, following them. But the beach was empty, save for the distant calls of the seagulls and the ever-present sound of the waves. That night, as they settled into bed, Sarah couldn't shake the unease that had been growing inside her. She lay awake, listening to the gentle crash of the waves outside, her mind replaying the image of that ship, and the anchor buried in the sand. She used to have eventually drifted off to sleep, but in the middle of the night, she was awoken by a sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the ocean, but as Sarah lay still, holding her breath, she realized it was coming from outside. A deep groaning creak, like the sound of wood straining under pressure. It was a sound she recognized from her childhood, the creaking of an old, wooden ship. Sarah sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced over at Mark, who was still fast asleep beside her. She listened again, and this the creaking was followed by the distinct sound of footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, coming from the beach. It was as though something was walking through the sand, heading toward the cottage. Her skin prickled with fear. Slowly, she slipped out of bed and crept toward the window, careful not to wake Mark. The moon was high in the sky, casting a pale glow over the beach, and when she saw them, figures, walking slowly along the shoreline. At first, she thought they were people, but as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized they weren't people at all. Their forms were twisted and distorted, like shadows barely holding together. They moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, their heads bowed, their limbs unnaturally long and thin. There were 5 of them, all walking in the same direction, their feet sinking into the wet sand as they approached the cottage. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She stepped back from the window, her pulse racing. These things, they weren't human. She was sure of it. She backed away slowly, her mind racing with what to do. Should she wake Mark? Should they leave? But before she could decide, a soft knock came at the door. Her blood turned to ice. She stood frozen, staring at the door as the knock came again, soft, but insistent. She took a step back, then another, her heart hammering in her chest. She glanced toward the window again, and he figures were gone. But she knew they were still out there, just beyond the door. Sarah rushed back to the bed and shook Mark awake. Mark, wake up, she hissed, her voice trembling. He groaned, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? Something's outside. I heard it, I saw them. Mark sat up, confused and groggy. What are you talking about? But before she could explain, the knocking came again, louder this time. Mark's eyes widened, and he quickly got out of bed, pulling on his clothes. He moved toward the door, but Sarah grabbed his arm. Dawn, open it, she whispered urgently. Sarah, it's probably just someone who got lost, he replied, but the doubt in his voice was clear. Please, she begged. Dawn, open it. Mark hesitated, then backed away from the door, his face pale. The knocking continued, growing more frantic with each passing second. It was as if whatever was outside was growing impatient, demanding to be let in. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the door shook violently. On its hinges. Sarah screamed, and Mark grabbed her by the arm, pulling her toward the back of the cottage. We need to get out of here, he said, his voice tight with fear. They grabbed their shoes and fled out the back door, sprinting across the sand. Sarah glanced back only once, just in time to see the door of the cottage splinter and give way. The figures, those twisted, shadowy forms, were inside now, moving. Slowly through the doorway, their heads still bowed. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the village, where they banged on the door of the nearest house. An old fisherman opened the door, startled to see them in such a panic. Please, Sarah gasped. There's something on the beach. The old man's face turned grave. You saw them, he said quietly. Saw what? Mark asked, still catching his breath. The cursed ones, the fisherman replied, his voice low. Long ago, a ship went down off this coast. Everyone aboard was lost. The villagers tried to save them, but it was no use. The bodies washed ashore for weeks, but they were never laid to rest. Now, they come back, looking for the living to join them in the sea. Sarah's blood ran cold as the old man spoke. Why didn't anyone warn us? He shook his head. Some things are better left forgotten. They never returned to the cottage. The next day, they packed their bags and left the village, vowing never to speak of what had happened. But Sarah could never forget the sight of those figures on the beach, their distorted forms etched into her memory forever. Story 3, The Siren's Call. Tom had always loved the ocean. Growing up near the coast, he spent most of his childhood exploring the rocky shores, diving into the waves, and searching for hidden treasures in the tidal pools. Now, as an adult, he was drawn to the sea more than ever. So when he was invited by his friends to join them for a weekend camping trip on a secluded beach, he couldn't resist. The beach was located on an island a few miles off the coast, accessible only by boat. It was known for its untouched beauty, clear, turquoise waters, white sandy shores, and, most famous, its eerie shipwreck that had been rusting away just offshore for nearly a century. Local legends told stories of strange occurrences around the wreck, but Tom didn't believe in ghosts or curses. To him, it was just a beautiful, mysterious spot to explore. They arrived on the island just before sunset, their small boat rocking gently as they anchored it near the shore. The beach was even more breathtaking in person. Tall cliffs framed the sandy cove, and the shipwreck loomed ominously in the distance, its rusted hull partially submerged in the shallow waters. Tom felt a thrill of excitement at the sight of it. He couldn't wait to explore. That night, they set up camp near the edge of the cliffs, the sound of the waves lulling them into a sense of peace. They built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told ghost stories under the stars. Tom's friends laughed about the island's spooky reputation, teasing each other about who would be the first to see the ghost of the old ship's captain. But as the night wore on and the fire died down, Tom found himself drawn to the wreck. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the water, and the ship's silhouette looked almost inviting. His friends had already retreated to their tents, but Tom wasn't tired. He grabbed his flashlight and made his way down to the water's edge, the cool sand shifting beneath his feet. The wreck was only about 100 yards offshore, and at low tide, you could almost walk right up to it. Tom waded into the shallow water, the waves gently lapping at his legs as he approached the rusted hull. The ship was massive, even more imposing up close. Barnacles and seaweed clung to its sides, and the metal groaned softly in the breeze. Tom climbed onto a large rock that jutted out of the water, giving him a better view of the wreck. He shined his flashlight along the deck, trying to imagine what the ship must have looked like in its prime. But as he stood there, a strange sound reached his ears, a faint, melodic humming, barely audible over the sound of the waves. He turned off his flashlight, listening more intently. The humming grew louder, more distinct, and it seemed to be coming from the ship. It was beautiful, almost hypnotic. like a lullaby carried on the wind. Tom felt a strange compulsion to move closer, to step off the rock and wade out to the ship. His heart raced with a mix of fear and curiosity. He knew it was dangerous, the wreck was unstable, and there was no telling what might be lurking in the water around it. But the song, it was pulling him in, drawing him toward the ship like a magnet. He couldn't resist. Without thinking, Tom waded deeper into the water, the waves rising to his chest as he neared the ship's hull. The song was louder now, almost deafening, and he could feel it vibrating in his bones. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, something ancient and powerful, beckoning high. Closer. As he reached the side of the ship, Tom grasped onto a rusted ladder that hung from the deck. The metal was slick with algae, but he climbed, his hands trembling as he hoisted himself up onto the deck. The air was thick with the smell of salt and decay, and the ship creaked beneath his weight. The song was all around him now, filling his mind, drowning out all other thoughts. He stumbled across the deck, his eyes glazed over as he followed the sound. And then, he saw her. She was standing at the edge of the ship, her long, dark hair flowing in the wind, her back to him. She wore a tattered, white gown, the fabric fluttering like sea foam in the breeze. Her bare feet were perched on the railing, as though she were about to leap into the water below. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to call out to her, to ask who she was, but the words wouldn't come. The song was still playing in his head, louder now, almost unbearable. The woman slowly turned to face him, and Tom felt his heart stop. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her eyes large and dark, like two empty voids. Her lips curved in to a smile, but there was nothing warm or kind about it. It was a cold, predatory grin, like a shark circling its prey. "Come closer," she whispered, her voice echoing in his mind. Tom's feet moved on their own, carrying him closer to the woman. He was no longer in control of his body, something else had taken over, something dark and malevolent. The woman's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he neared the edge of the ship, her smile widening. Just as he was about to step off the deck, a sudden jolt of fear shot through Tom's mind, breaking the spell. He stumbled back, his heart racing, as the woman's face twisted into a mask of rage. She let out a blood-curdling scream, the sound piercing the night air, and in an instant, she was gone, vanished into the water below. Tom stood frozen on the deck, his mind reeling. The song had stopped, and the ship was silent once more. His heart pounded in his chest as he backed away from the edge, his legs shaking. He didn't know how long he stood there, staring at the spot where the woman had disappeared. But eventually, he made his way back to the beach, his mind still foggy from the encounter. His friends were asleep in their tents, oblivious to what had happened. The next morning, Tom didn't say a word about the woman or the song. He packed up his things and left the island with his friends, vowing never to return. But the memory of that night haunted him for years to come, the sound of the siren's call echoing in his mind, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the sea.